that means that we don't have a democracy anymore and the president is king.
We have a dictatorship.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this is thermonuclear bad. Because if the courts say, Mr. President, you cannot do this, it is unconstitutional or illegal.
All right, everybody, we're back on the Young Turks today with Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks discussing what JD Vance said. Apparently, JD Vance is paving the way for what you heard Cenk Uygur said there. He's just destroying the separation of powers, and he's paving the way for a monarchy, a dictatorship. That's what the liberals and the Democrats have been saying, of course, since Donald Trump first won back in 2016 for his first term. But they've been saying it ever since. They were saying it in the run-up to the latest election, and they're saying it today now. The dictator is here, the God Emperor 2.0. Let's get into it with the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur.
JD Vance said judges aren't allowed to control the executive power. What's your take on that?
Yesterday, President Donald Trump was asked about a shocking post that was authored by his own Vice President, JD Vance. Now, we'll show you what Trump had to say in just a minute. You definitely want to hear it. But first, we do need to explain what JD Vance wrote and why he wrote it. So on Saturday, a federal judge issued an injunction that blocked Elon Musk and his Doge team from accessing the Treasury Department's central payment system. Now, the payment system contains all sorts of private information about all of us, okay? Our Social Security information, sensitive stuff like that, bank account numbers. Now, the injunction came after 19 state attorneys general sued Musk and Doge, claiming that Doge's access to the system could illegally interfere with funds appropriated by Congress, could break federal administrative law, and violated the Treasury Department's legal obligation to keep Americans' personal, private information and data safe. Now, a hearing on the issue has been set for February 14th. But the Trump administration has not been reacting well to this, right? The temporary block of Elon Musk being able to access all that private data, he doesn't like it. He's been complaining about it. Multiple posts on X make that clear. He writes, this ruling is absolutely insane. How on earth are we supposed to stop fraud and waste of taxpayer money without looking at how money is spent? That's literally impossible. Something super shady is going to protect scammers. He later wrote that a corrupt judge is protecting corruption. He needs to be impeached now. But JD Vance took it a step further, and this is genuinely concerning because if he's going along with what Curtis Yarvin, who wants literal monarchy in America, like if he goes along with what Yarvin wants, we have a constitutional crisis on our hands. So let me explain. JD Vance wrote, if a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general in how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. Although judges are supposed to be part of our system of checks and balances and check a president if he does something that goes beyond his constitutional duties, right? And by the way, I mean, yeah, if a general commits war crimes, a judge can weigh in. Like you literally do have a situation where the courts can weigh in. Go ahead.
That statement by JD Vance is 100% wrong. It's meant to, and JD Vance went to Yale, he knows it's wrong. It's meant to trick you. So if a judge tried to command the attorney general on how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also legal. No, it's not. It depends on the situation. What if the prosecutor took a bribe and so decided not to do a prosecution of a murderer? The judge can step in and go, no, you took a bribe. You're not allowed to do that.
So does this mean that any judges were unable to or prevented from ever weighing in on the special counsel's prosecution of Donald Trump?
Yeah, it's another great question. So look, guys, Marbury v. Madison, the most important case in Supreme Court history, one of the first cases that set most important precedent, which is the courts decide what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. you need that ref because you're always going to have questions about what is constitutional and not. If the executive branch goes, I'm deciding what's constitutional, well, that's a giant problem because then that leads to authoritarianism.
Well, maybe authoritarianism is what America and the West need these days. You know, I of course, for a big part of my life was, I've always been sort of conservative. I actually consider myself a liberal for most of my life, but that's because liberal had a different meaning to me. It just meant open-minded. It didn't mean crazy. But anyway, so if you're a traditionalist, I would call myself a traditionalist. Yeah, I would have always defended, yes, American democracy, the system works, and it did work. It was a good experiment. It was a successful experiment. But because of outside influences which were never taken into account, including mass migration, from non-European countries starting in 1965 in the United States, the system is breaking down. Now, there's other problems too. There's the mass offshoring of production, just basically the destruction of America, yeah, and what it meant to be American. Basically, it's been destroyed. It's not dead yet, of course, but it's been destroyed. It's no longer the same. And since it's no longer the same, I don't think it can be ruled in the same way. So I think there is, I know people who are much, much further down this road of this path of thinking than I am. So I hope you're not too shocked. But yeah, an authoritarian approach, why not? A monarch, why not at this point? If it's whoever's in charge should be looking after the American people and their interests. And yes, they shouldn't be controlled by oligarchs, that I agree. I'm not saying we should be ruled by an oligarchy of people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, God forbid. But we should be ruled by people who actually care about not just the economy, not just, winning the game, but making, America a good place like it was for Americans.
That is why we objected to Barack Obama doing unilateral drone strikes on American citizens without judicial approval. And by the way, Eric Holder should hold his head in shame for the rest of his life for saying that that due process is not necessarily judicial review, okay? That the executive branch can do due process on their own. That is garbage. It's not even close to true. Eric Holder also went to the top schools and he knows that's not true. So we are fair and honest no matter who's president or which side. What Barack Obama did was totally unacceptable. And what they're saying here is beyond unacceptable. Because if you don't listen to the courts, then our entire system breaks down. Because then the executive branch doesn't have to listen to anyone. Because if the courts say, hey, wait, Congress approved that spending, and the executive branch says, I'm not gonna do the spending, but wait, the Congress is supposed to pass the laws. They have the power of the purse. But if the executive branch doesn't listen to the courts, then they don't have to listen to Congress either. That means that we don't have a democracy anymore, and the president is king.
We have a dictatorship.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this is thermonuclear bad. Because if the courts say, Mr. President, you cannot do this. It is unconstitutional or illegal. And he says, I don't care. I'm gonna do it anyway, and I have the guns and you don't. Well, that means we'll try to have elections next time around. That means we've got a giant hole in our democracy, and that ship is gonna sink real quick. Because if that means there's really no check on the presidency. That's not America. That's not democracy. That's not our Constitution. So of all the stories we've covered for you, I think this is the most dangerous.
I agree with you. And I think that they are gonna ignore the courts. And if they do ignore the courts, then what happens? I mean, does the Supreme Court call for their arrest? That's not gonna happen.
No, so one of the next steps is, and this is unfortunately both tragic and amusing because of how ridiculous it is. They say the next thing that the courts would do if you're not following orders, and in one of the cases, the Trump administration so far has not followed the orders, and a judge has said, you're not following a court order, you must do that right now. The next thing they would have is contempt. You're in contempt, okay? All right, and what does that do? What sanctions does that carry? Nothing, zero. And so the articles hilariously explain, but that has the power of shaming.
Come on.
How are you going to shame people that are shameless?
How are you going to shame people that are shameless? Good question. Now, if you're still listening to this, yeah, it's interesting. So they're worried about the total breakdown, the takeover by, the dictatorship is upon us, according to the Young Turks, or it's imminent. That might be true. I said earlier that, well, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe that's actually what we need, because the rot is thorough. America has been hollowed out. The people are no longer a moral people in many cases. Unfortunately, I must say that. Same about here in Europe, where I am. Now, European countries have completely different context from the United States, but any country to work has to have a people who are working together, people who trust each other. For Western civilization to work, you need high trust societies. And the various peoples of Europe, were high trust societies, but they've been hollowed out by mass migration, by, again, the offshoring of destruction of communities due to the offshoring of production and real world jobs. Now large portions of the economy in the Western world are just financial. It's people moving ones and zeros around on computer screens and making money that way. Well, great if you can do it, but it's not real. It's not a real thing. People need real work and to make real things and to have real skills. So I do think actually, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but I think it's inevitable that there is going to be some sort of, the American style democracy is going to rejig itself. It's going to either collapse in some way or another. America will split up in some way or another. Impossible to say when, and that in one of those future entities there will absolutely be a form of, monarchy or dictatorship or something like that. Who knows? That's just my guess. In Europe, it's a bit different, but I think it'll happen here eventually. First, I think the European Union has to just be shut down, basically, or return to maybe its original task, like it was when the European communities were created in the 1950s. But these things are all going to take time, and in the meantime, who knows what could happen. Anyway, let me know what you think about what I had to say. Am I just a crank? Am I over the top? Am I some sort of anti-democratic fascist? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm always willing to hear your point of view, even if you disagree with me strongly. Just be respectful about it. And I will see you in the next video.